I think it's an excellent idea to talk about Edmund Burke, not least because his ideas are very much still in the air in British political debate, in American political debate, and to a lesser extent in European political debate as well. So to quickly walk through Burke's life, the main milestones of his career. So Edmund Burke is an 18th century figure. His life basically spans the 18th century. He's born in, by most accounts, in 1729 in Dublin, Ireland. He would call himself something that's not very fashionable, depending where you sit on the side of Irish debate these days, an Anglo-Irish thinker and politician. Some people object to this term today, some others still espouse it, of course. But he considered himself an Anglo-Irish politician. Born in Dublin, he dies in 1797. So basically, his life runs through the whole of the 18th century, what we call in 18th century history as the, in Britain, the Hanoverian period, because it's the Hanoverian dynasty, the first three Georges, basically, of the new dynasty. So he's born in Dublin. He's not an aspiring politician to start with. He's an aspiring man of letters. So he studies in Trinity College, Dublin, one of the 5 ancient universities of the United Kingdom. His family background is mixed in the sense that his father is a Protestant. He's a conformist because he's a lawyer. And to be a lawyer in the 18th century in Ireland, you had to be at least officially a Protestant. But his mother and his mother's family were all Catholics, very prominent Catholics, actually, from the south of Ireland. And of course, that already creates some problems with Edmund Burke's career, because the usual charge that was leveled against him to the end of his life was basically that he was a crypto-Catholic, or as the Duke of Newcastle once labeled him, an Irish adventurer or a Jesuit adventurer. Now, in 18th century England or 18th century Britain, there is a lot of anti-Catholic bias running. It's very difficult to be Irish, and it's even more difficult being Irish Catholic. Basically, you're a second-class citizen, because there are all these laws in place that are gradually repealed over the 18th century and moving on to the 19th century with the repeal of the Test and Corporation Acts in 1828, which is the last main legislative barrier to Catholic emancipation. So it is very difficult. Burke, there have been many articles and book chapters written about his religion. My conclusion is that he was a latitudinarian, as we say, Christian. I think he was eclectic in the way he understood the basic creed and morals of Christianity. He was, for all public appearances, an Anglican, a high Anglican. He was a conformist, but he also championed the Catholic cause throughout his career, but not as an Irish radical, but more as of an enlightened Whig, Anglo-Irish Whig, who would like to see more religious tolerance enacted in Ireland. But to go back, he graduates from Trinity College, Dublin. At that point, he decides that Ireland is too small for him, too small to hold him. He goes down to London, down south to London, and he decides to study to be a lawyer. His father was a lawyer, of course. His whole family background, we were lawyers in Dublin. So he studies at the Inns in Lincoln's Inns in London. And he graduates from there. He becomes, he never really practices as a barrister, but he soon takes on employment as the private secretary to a nobleman called Gerard Hamilton, who was appointed in, if I remember correctly, 1750s as the private secretary to the Chief Secretary of Ireland. So basically, the Viceroy of Ireland, Hamilton, will work for him as his Chief Secretary, and he hires Burke as his own Chief Secretary. So it's a very junior post to start with in government and politics. He travels back to Ireland. These are very unhappy years for Burke's life because he basically feels like a slave to his political master, Hamilton. He still likes to think himself as a man of letters. It is in this period that he writes his two non-political works. The one is A Vindication of Natural Society, which is a philosophical satire of the ideas of Lord Bolingbroke, a very prominent Tory of the first half of the 18th century. And the second one, for which probably he's most famous after the reflections on the revolution in France, is the Enquiry into the Origins of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful, which is a treatise on aesthetics. He writes those the Enquiry is a very influential work, even in its own time. He builds upon ideas articulated by Salisbury and Longinus in ancient Rome and ancient Greece. Sorry. And he moves on to he has a horrible row with Hamilton. He breaks with Hamilton, and at that point in time, he's pretty much floating on the air until an invitation comes from the Marquis of Rockingham, the richest man in England at the time, a Yorkshire magnate, a very prominent Whig politician, who basically takes Burke as his protege and he adopts him politically. He makes him his own private secretary. And from then onwards starts a gradual political advancement for Edmund Burke. He eventually becomes an MP for a rotten borough, basically a pocket borough of Lord Rockingham's with no actual electorate, as it happens in the 18th century. Cities like Old Sarum, which is basically a hill, has 2 MPs and Liverpool has none, things like that. And he becomes an MP for Malton, which is a pocket borough. Stays on as an MP for almost 30 years. He retires from Parliament in 1795, 2 years before his death. For a brief period of time, he represents the very popular constituency of Bristol, which has an actual electorate because it's a very prosperous 18th century commercial port, town, city. So he actually contests a normal, by modern standards, by-election in Bristol. And he serves twice in a junior ministerial post as Paymaster General of the Forces under Rockingham and later under the Fox North coalition. He never reaches cabinet status. He never enters into cabinet. And there are many explanations as to why Burke is never made a cabinet minister. The most probable is that because of those anti-Irish, anti-Catholic biases in the 18th century, also because of his temper, because of his public crusades against prominent figures like Warren Hastings. He's involved with the impeachment of Warren Hastings for the better half of 10 years, trying to impeach the former governor of Bengal, the East India Trading Company. He writes a lot of pamphlets. He's a prolific writer. Burke's complete works amount to 9 volumes. Just to give you an example of the volume of the surviving works, because there is so much else that hasn't survived. And his correspondence amounts to 6 or 7 volumes, if I remember correctly. And again, so much of it has been lost. So that's a very brief overview of the political career of the man, not his works or his ideas. And I think we can delve deeper into specific aspects of his life and politics now that we have this sort of very brief and very panoramic understanding of his movements.